be kind. And subscribe.
Bienvenue, welcome to the United Nations Horror. Your hosts Mark and Jason. Hi Jason.
Hi Mark, how are you today?
Yeah, pretty good. Looking forward to talking about this movie, that's for sure.
Happy spooky month to you.
Yes, we're in October now, aren't we? So yes.
Yes,
and
to all our listeners.
Yes, I have to say, a bit of a plug for another podcast. I always, every Halloween, in fact, every October, I listen to Talk Without Rhythms, 31 Days of Halloween, because he does a movie a day and his normal podcast. So he's doing 4 podcasts, or 5, depending on when it falls, in a month, and 31 smaller podcasts about a different movie he's never seen. And this is year 13, I believe.
That is an unbelievable output.
It's a really good listen. El Goro is the guy, and it's a terrific listen. So I just want to give that a mention. I always look forward to October and him starting his 31 days. He always talks about quite interesting stuff. And it's interesting this time. It's just... He usually does it in kind of a chronological order. Like, he does very early silent ones, and as he goes on, it gets later. But he probably is still doing it like that, but he's jumped forward quite a bit this time, so he's already into the 80s quite a bit for the last few. So, and 70s, I think, was day 2 onwards. So, much more modern stuff, and it's kind of surprising what movies he hasn't seen as well sometimes, but other times it's movies I've never even heard of, so I look forward to that because it's like, that's interesting, I'll put that down to watch them. So yeah, got to mention that. Thought I'd mention that.
I always feel like there's something always something new to watch in horror, which is the great thing about the genre, and I feel like that's why this podcast can honestly keep going for years and years, because
it's a very rubbery, it's a rubbery genre, isn't it? I mean,
it is. Yeah,
it goes from quite extreme to goofy as hell, and it doesn't really matter. It's all horror, right? It's all horror. What always makes me laugh is those like fairly prestigious horror films that the critics or people that like them but don't like horror pretend they're not horror films. That always makes me laugh. I have a chuckle about that. Anyway, so what we're talking about today is a British horror film from 1973. And, Britain's not bad at outputting its horrors. It's not bad. This is...
some of my favourites.
Yeah, I mean, we got all the Hammer for a start, right?
Exactly.
But this isn't Hammer. It's 73. It's when Hammer were around, but this isn't a Hammer film. But it is Psychomania.
They were just ordinary troublemakers as long as they lived. But they returned from beyond the grave with superhuman powers, unleashing an unholy reign of terror that holds an entire community in the grip of Psychomania. Psychomania.
Everybody dies, don't they? But some come back. How do the dead come back, Mother?
When you die, you've got to believe that you're going to come back.
Come, you kill yourself!
That's right! Off the bridge! I'm going! can only die once. After that, nothing and nobody can harm you.
Oh, man, what are we waiting for?
I must stop him.
You can't.
I must.
Psychomania.
What happened? You're not dead.
That's what I was trying to tell you, Tom. I don't want to die.
Get after them!
And you know what you will become?
Yes.
And that it will be for all eternity.
You can only die once. After that, nothing and nobody can harm you.
Psychomania.
Also called The Death Wheelers. When it was released in the US, it was called The Death Wheelers. Though Psychomania is a better name, I think.
The US title made me chuckle. I think Psychomania is a much better title.
So it doesn't mean anything, of course. It means absolutely nothing, but it's just a great title.
It just sounds cooler, I think, you know?
Psychomania.
Like way cooler than the Death Wheelers.
Yeah. And we got possibly, well, I say this ironically, of course, the coolest motorcycle gang ever, right?
Yes.
Yes. Now, a lot of people have seen this film and talked about it. In fact, it was really weird when we decided to watch it. I happened to be reading a book about folk horror, and there was a whole chapter on Psychomania, which really surprised me. Because I wouldn't have considered this folk horror, but I can kind of see it. But this guy, he basically said something like, and I think I posted a clip from the first line of the chapter, which was, by any metrics, Psychomania is not a good film. However, Psychomania is terrific.
I totally agree with that analysis. Like, as we're going to talk about, the plot is bonkers and all over the place, and yet it manages to still stay cool, you know, and just fun, and it's rather punchy throughout. So I don't know if I never get bored when watching this film. I think this is probably the third or fourth time I've seen Psychomania, and as I was telling you in the chat, every time I see it again, I'm reminded how much I like it, and I think I like it more on every viewing.
Yeah, it's very solid. I did put out a note about feedback. We only got one piece of feedback, but it's quite an interesting piece of feedback from Kevin Matthews.
Hey,
hi,
Kevin, how's it going, man?
Feedback. So what he says is, objectively speaking, Psychomania isn't exactly what you call a good film. The acting is varied, the premise is amusing and slightly ridiculous, and it centres on a biker gang who I spent years telling people weren't even half as tough as those infamous Hell's Grannies featured in a memorable sketch in Monty Python's Flying Circus. But objectivity be damned. I've always loved this wacky film, and I'll spend as much time as it takes to convince others of its merits. I generally love it. I've got a nice Blu-ray release. I have got to get this. I didn't realise there was Blu-ray.
I didn't either.
And it has one or two surprisingly memorable moments. 8 out of 10 for me. So Kevin really likes this film too. So do I. If you look on it though, you know, there's some really wacky stuff going on in British horror cinema in the early 70s.
Yeah.
As well as quite intense stuff. You know, you've got your Witchfinder Generals. I mean, that's a bit earlier. You've got your Devils. You got pretty intense stuff, but there's quite a lot of wacky ones in the early 70s too. Like we did, what was it? Well, I can't remember the exact title, but was it Girly,
Yes,
Mumsy, Sonny, and Nanny? You know, things like that, right?
Just awful,
There's some really
stuff.
weird. Yeah, really weird. There's another one about a hospital, and I can't remember the name. Probably Horror Hospital, and it's kind of also nuts as well. But you also got your Death Lines, which kind of is grim, but also silly in premise. But and I have to tell you, I didn't know this before. Apparently, this was produced by the same producers of Horror Express.
Oh, nice.
Ben Maher Productions did Horror Express. So, man, they are batting well.
Yes.
Man, Horror Express is really
that's
something.
pure gold.
The main actor in this, Nicky Henson, thought he was doing a piece of crap. And he thought it would just get forgotten because it's so terrible. So he didn't really want to be in it, but he thought, well, no one's going to see it, so it doesn't really matter. And of course, people come up to him and say things like, the word mother is fuzz. It's like that to this day. So imagine that.
He's thinking, why did I do this?
Yeah, well, he wanted to do it because when they sent him the script, it was about these gang of bikers on Harleys, and he was a biker himself at the time. He did have a car.
Oh, he was.
And he thought,
Wow.
I've got to do this film. And when it turned out, there was all these clapped out old motorbikes, not Harleys. So he's like, what's this?
He's like, this is not Hell's Angels.
Yeah. Did I finish what Kevin was saying? Yes, I did I? Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, we kind of agree with Kevin, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that point. I think he's spot on his review. It's crazy. It's a crazy film, but everything I've seen. Sorry, go on. Well, every British horror I've seen from the 70s has been really enjoyable, I have to say. And really, the same with a lot of American horror cinema from the 1970s. Yeah. I feel like you had some really good stuff coming out that was more intense than the 1960s for sure. And kind of the same, really sort of the same from England, but
yeah. Well, at the beginning of the 70s, we had the tail end of all the Amicus anthologies, which are great.
Indeed.
We had the tail end of Hammer, and those were some great, wacky movies in the
They were crazy.
70s. They couldn't compete with the likes of Night of the Living Dead and The Exorcist, though. They just could not compete for the audience. But we still love them, right?
Absolutely. They're still awesome.
Yeah. And then
Dracula ED.
And it's funny, some American money came to British shores to make horror. The Omen.
Yes.
Yeah, it's American, but it's set in England. It's got an English cast and crew to give it some prestige. I felt like I was one, It was kind of interesting. Anyway, we're getting sidelined. Psychomania.
I would say, I feel like when you have, what we would say, about foreign film, but when American money is injected into foreign film, it's a good thing. Typically, as long as there's not any creative control from the studios, I think that's always key. Like if you look at Lord of the Rings, an absolute masterpiece. I'll still say I think they're the three best films ever made, and that's because there was pretty much no studio involvement except for funding. And then if you look at The Hobbit, 15 years later, it's it's not, all those films are not very good, and there's a reason. Studio involvement.
Yeah, and rushed. It was rushed, and it wasn't a project. It wasn't a project of love.
Exactly.
For Peter Jackson. He just had to do it because he was bound to do it. But
and Del Toro.
So well, was he? I think he just left. He didn't. He ran out of time.
Yep.
Right? It just didn't start. Anyway, so yes, so. Okay, we have Nicky Henson. Right, again, the oldest teenagers you've ever seen. These are meant to be 18. Right. Yeah. But we've seen all this in Greece. We're kind of used to that.
That's true.
So, so he basically, Nicky Henson is the leader of this gang called the Living Dead, who kind of terrorise the local precinct. Don't they? In fact, that's the one they're driving through, motorbiking through, and kicking stalls down and all this kind of stuff. They're pretty tough.
The first time, they're in that it's not like a parking area. I guess it's like a pedestrian shopping area.
It's a pedestrian area.
But then I love it when later in the film they go back to that same area, but they go into like, I guess it's a grocery store. Is it?
Well, it's a supermarket,
Yeah.
an old-fashioned supermarket before they got really big, and they're just being nuts. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to
Indeed.
that. But basically, they're scamps, and I had to laugh at some of the names of the bikers. We have. Let me get this. Hatchet, who's a short sort of ginger. They've all got long hair, mostly.
Oh, of course. Hippies. Those.
Chopped meat, Gash, Hinky, and possibly my favourite, which is Bertram.
I like Bertram. That doesn't sound like a biker name, though, does it?
No, it doesn't sound like it. Just like
Bertram, please come to me.
Yeah.
You know. And I apologize to our British listeners. I know my accent is not good.
Yeah. And we also have Jane with her knee-length white leather boots. She has the whole film, which is kind of cool.
Indeed.
And Abby. And it is funny that all of them have got their name printed on their jacket. So like, they're so easily to identify.
If you ever wondered who was who.
Yeah. And it is funny, they're all kind of dressed the same apart from Jane, who's got a red jacket and white knee-length boots. She's driving around a motorcycle in platform boots, which is quite impressive.
Yeah.
So we have all of these characters. Also, we have a lady. Basically, Nicky Henson's mother is played by Beryl Reid, a very famous British actress from TV, and it's kind of interesting to see her in a film. But she's really well known.
Oh, really?
She's much more known for when she was older. So this kind of time.
I have to say,
when she was younger. She's always played that kind of role as far as I can remember. But we also get a butler called Shadwell, played by George Sanders.
I love the name Shadwell, by the way.
Shadwell.
Shadwell.
And George Sanders, very prestigious actor. He did film movies in America. He's been in some Hitchcock stuff. He was the voice of Shere Khan in The Jungle Book.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That was him. That's velvety voice.
Indeed, he has a great voice.
Yeah, and this was his last film. Weirdly, he committed suicide after this film.
Oh. Well, that's sad.
But, not because of the film. Basically,
Right.
he had. I think he had a stroke from the sound of it. It doesn't say that, but he said he had speech problems, and he just was. He wrote a suicide note, was basically saying, "I'm bored." Basically, but his career was built on his voice, really. So you can kind of understand.
Yeah,
it must have been difficult for him.
Oh, I'm sure.
But yeah, it's just weird because of the nature of this film as well. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really good actor.
And he was fairly old. Let's be clear.
Yeah, he was. But I definitely think that George Sanders and Beryl Reid, definitely the best actors in the film, I believe.
Yeah, they were pretty good. The Inspector was good. That was Robert Hardy, who went on to a much bigger career as quite a famous actor in TV, mostly TV. In fact, he went on to play Churchill in quite a famous TV series.
I can see him as Churchill. Yeah, that's a really
he was very
good role
effective
for him.
as Churchill. Yeah. And apart from Nicky Henson and possibly Bertram, Roy Holder, I can't recall seeing any of the others in anything else. But those two I do remember seeing. Nicky Henson was, for example, in Which One the General.
Yes.
So there is that. So I have to say I really like the opening music, the credit music. Is that kind of really cool, not quite disco-y because it's a bit early for disco, but it's got like an electronic kind of with some orchestral. Did you like it?
I did. I always liked the sounds of these kind of 70s films. Blaxploitation films had a lot of these kind of themes, and it's just I don't know. It's super catchy. It's groovy, I guess, is maybe they would have said at the time.
Yeah. They did release it as a single on the B-side. The goofy song they sing in the middle? Like, was it Riding Free or something?
Yeah.
It was good. They did release those as a double A-side, basically.
Oh, nice.
Under the artist name Frog.
That's perfect.
which ties to the film, right?
I think it's funny how they pretty much play that song like back to back, like, you know, during the funeral scene they play it, and then they're riding away and they play it again. It's like, okay, guys, we get the idea.
Yeah. I really did like the main theme. I thought it was really good.
Yeah, me too.
Which is weird because I also really like the theme to Werewolf on Wheels, another biker movie. I really think the theme's terrific, but the actual film is terrible, boring as well. Not good like Psychomania. It's just
that's
boring.
a shame.
Yeah, so basically, there's this. It's a weird credit sequence too. We see a stone circle, don't we, with a fog, and these bikers just like doing a pattern through the stones and through each other. You know, like a riding team kind of thing, but very slow.
Yeah, it's almost. It's like some sort of ritualistic riding. It's strange, and the stones sort of remind me of like a much smaller, almost like a Stonehenge kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, we have lots of stones like that through the British countryside.
Really? Fascinating.
In certain places. Yeah. It's
not
not uncommon. I mean, they're not everywhere, but there are places where you see standing stones that have been there for thousands of years and no one knows the origin. Obviously, the most famous is Stonehenge, but there is an amazing place where there's a village within concentric rings called Avebury, which is really something to go visit. And in fact, there are ceremonies there, you know, pagans do their ceremonies there. Wow. You can watch as long as you're respectful.
Right. That would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Something to add to
it's kind of an interesting place. It's a place I keep wanting to go to, but it's a bit too far to go for the day. We were there when we were on a holiday and we were on the way back, and we thought, well, yeah, let's go there. And I've been there, and it's kind of I really like it there.
Oh, cool.
But this we do find out during the film, this circle is called the Seven Witches. And there is very brief mention, oh yes, the Seven Witches broke their deal with the devil and got turned to stone.
Yeah,
that's what,
I kind of like how they handle the plot points like that, because they don't go into a lot of detail, but I think is perfectly fine for this film, and I think it works very well.
Yeah, they do enough.
Yeah, just enough.
And also, we have to mention the biker gang have a weird design on their helmets, so it looks like a bit like a skull.
Yeah, I like the helmets. I don't know. Maybe it's my hat thing. I mean, I know you have the hat thing too, Mark. But this is cool. You know, especially
they're totally dangerous. I used to be a biker, and your visibility would be really poor.
Oh, I'd imagine.
But yeah, you know what? There were some kind of cool motorcycle car chases throughout this that look really dangerous.
I agree.
They look like they just went out on the road and started riding around and didn't tell anyone. And there was cars skidding all over the place and bikes going around cars at high speed. It's like, whoa, this looks quite dangerous.
Yeah.
We're quite excited.
Yeah, the stunt work is all really well done. The motorcycle stunts, I should say, are really well done.
Yeah. And we see this. We have to mention the gang is kind of quite posh, aren't they?
They are.
They're not like working dudes or anything like that. Hello. That's all this. But Tom, who is played by Nicky Henson, Tom the leader, it's his 18th birthday, and he goes home. And we before he gets home, we see Beryl Reid's character and Chadwell doing a seance where she's basically doing the voice of this little girl talking to this mother, saying, I'm very happy here and all this, which is kind of spooky and weird.
Indeed, yeah.
And reminded me a bit, there's a similar scene in Night of the Demon. I kind of remember a similar scene in Night of the Demon. And anyway, they're doing it, it's weird because the plot as it goes on is they're evil people or bad people, maybe they're worshipping something else, but they're helping out people with pleasure, and they don't take money or anything. And in fact, there is after the seance, they say, look, we're very happy, and I know you don't take any money? No, he goes, no. Shadwell's like, no, we don't. No. He goes, but I'd like you to give you a family heirloom. And he opens it, and it's a silver cross.
Yeah.
And Shadwell
doesn't
get
like that
out!
Yeah. He really loses it, doesn't he?
Get out, all of you! And it's kind of thing. It's
like,
he doesn't like the cross.
No. It's like, Shadwell, okay.
Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah.
Mr. Shadwell.
Yeah. And we do go on to find out. So
Indeed, we do.
Tom comes home and says, Mother, she says, we got a phone call about your behaviour from the police. And he says, the word, Mother, is fuzz.
Oh, I love that line
and she
so
says,
much.
But you could get arrested. And he's like, the word, Mother, is busted.
Oh.
And also, when they're talking, they start waltzing.
They do.
He pulls her out of the chair and it's like, no music at all. They're just waltzing around the room. And I was thinking, were they meant to loop in music over this and they forgot? Or what? It was something weird between the mother and the son here. Right?
Yeah.
He says, I want to know 3 things, Mother. And I can't remember the specifics, but essentially he says, it's something like, why does Shadwell never get older? And he also says, what happened to my father when I was born? And she says, do you have to drag something out from so long ago? It's 18 years ago because it was when I was born and I'm 18, so I deserve to know.
Right.
And she's going, no, you don't want to know. And Shadwell's like, I think you should know.
Yeah, he is.
They give him the key to this room, and they also give this weird little charm necklace to him. And it was kind of cool because he went in the room and he saw something weird in the mirror, which I'll come back to. But then he turned around to leave, but it was a solid wall. Even though we saw him come in through a door, when he turned around to leave, it was a solid wall, so there was no way out.
Yeah.
And essentially, he kind of sees Beryl Reid, not very convincingly made up to look younger. She's basically got a wig on.
Yeah,
right?
pretty much.
But she's at the stone circle with the baby, with baby Tom, and then a weird figure just appears with a thunderclap, and it's Shadwell.
Oh yeah.
Well, you don't see it, Shadwell. You see his ring, but it's the ring Shadwell's
wearing.
We
know it's Shadwell at that point.
It's really so he's appeared from somewhere, some sort of spirit, and she puts the baby on the stone like she's presenting. Oh, she holds it up first, like roots or something, and then she puts it on the stone like she's offering the baby as something. Right, it's never explained. Then he sees a giant frog. I have to say, toads are a big thing in this, aren't they?
Oh yeah, big time.
Doesn't actually Tom find a toad? He's kissing his girlfriend, and suddenly he chases something through a graveyard, and it's a toad.
Yeah, and she gets mad at him.
He just tucks it in his jacket. She goes, "Do you want to make love to me, or do you just want to go chase toads or something?" And while they're kissing,
Yeah, she's not happy about that. And
anyway, he comes back and he gives the toad to Shadwell, who's well pleased. He goes, "Good example. You only find these in graveyards." And Tom says, "Yes." What else does he? He sees a giant frog. Who they kind of worship a frog god or something, don't they? Yeah. It's so weird.
I wasn't sure if they were going for paganism or some sort of obscure religion, and they don't ever really say either. But we do know that the frog is a big part of whatever their belief system is. But it's interesting because in most horror films from the time, you would find any religion that's kind of non-Christian in most films anyway to be portrayed as an evil cult, but they don't really portray them that way. Like you say, Mark, getting they're helping people, and it's it's kind of progressive actually for the time.
Yeah, and it's weird because it's when the gang start doing wrong that the mother basically stops them is the plot, right? So she's not entirely bad because of that, right?
Yeah,
so
she seems...
it's just she's a witch of some sort,
right?
But it's kind of there. She's made a deal, and the fact they don't like the cross suggests it's satanic, but they're not evil. It seems.
Yeah, they never come out and say they're evil. Even Shadwell, we don't know his total deal, but he doesn't come off as an evil doer. so to speak.
No, it's just a presence, isn't it? And basically, they get Tom out of the room and he's passed out, and they start talking about. She starts talking to Shadwell about her husband who died or disappeared or whatever he did 18 years before. He goes, if only he'd really believed he was going to come back, he would have, and we'd be here now. And then Tom goes, "Oh, thank you, mother." It's all right. So you just got to believe, have you? So then he goes back to the gang and he says, how fast have we ever done on the motorway? And this bloke goes, 95. And Jane's like, in your dreams. And goes, we're going to do it today. But then they don't do that. They just go racing around the town again and doing weird stuff. And then basically Abby, who's Tom's girlfriend, and Tom are riding, and he says, I'm going for it or something, and he just basically drives off a bridge.
Yeah,
side of a
it's
bridge.
kind of crazy. I almost get the impression, like, it's almost like they have a Dukes of Hazzard kind of thing going on with the law, where it's like, okay, we're going to make the cops or the pigs or whatever chase us. But then, yeah, him riding off the bridge, rather unexpected, I would say.
Good stunt. It was.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
it wouldn't kill you. There's no way this would kill you unless the bike hit you or something.
Right,
but
right.
He was basically hitting water.
It looked cool.
But then we have a weird scene where there's a little boy fishing. I mean, a young lad, quite young, and his sister, who must be about 4 or 5, presumably his sister anyway, just on their own on a riverbank. And the sister goes, look! And we see a dead biker floating face down. It's like, it's so weird. Such a weird thing.
Yeah, it's a very strange cut there. I don't know.
So
it seems like they just would have, cut away from that period. But maybe they thought, okay, we want the audience to know he is really dead. That's the only thing I can figure out with that scene, because it is rather jarring.
Yeah, it's weird to have little kids on their own by a riverbank for a start. Right?
Yeah.
It's the 70s, I guess. Anyway, so he's basically dead, and then Abby comes to see Tom's mother and says yes, and she's wearing a dress, and Tom's mom was like, I didn't expect you to look like that. You're wearing a dress, and and she says, we would like to bury Tom in our own way, if that's all right with you. And she says, I don't see why not. What do you think, Shadwell? Shadwell's, yeah, I don't see why not.
Yeah, you like it that way.
And then we cut to, they're by the Seven Sisters, and they've dug a big pit, and Tom is propped up on his bike, dead, mind you, in this pit. But they obviously didn't have the budget to dig a full pit, because he's a good foot above ground.
It is.
And then they just... and it's just like that. And then they sing. They're all dressed up as hippies at this point, and singing. And the guy's singing this song.
And it's a hippie song for sure.
Oh God, it's a bad song. It reminded me of Lesbian Seagull from Beavis and Butthead movie.
Oh, yeah.
It's that kind of silly sort of guitar song.
Yeah.
And they essentially they fill it in, and there's a huge mound. I mean, it's about 2 foot above the ground, this mound, where he was. So it's not a problem.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that'd be totally fine. You'd totally be able to take a body somewhere and just do that.
Oh yeah.
No problem. There's not a problem at all.
No embalming needed.
It's kind of I have to say, Shadwell turns up and says, there's something I want to leave, and he gets a box out, and I thought he was going to pull a toad out, but he pulls out a weird medallion and drops it in the grave with him. Again, it never gets referred to again, that bit.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, we see it earlier when he's about to go into the room. Shadwell gives him the same medallion, but then, that plot line is kind of just dropped, isn't it?
Yeah, it's indicating there's something mystic going on, I think.
Yeah.
And then, what happens next?
Well, I think it's interesting here, too, because it seems like there's a little bit of an issue, I'll say, going on between Abby and Jane, I felt like.
Oh, Jane wants to take control of the gang, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Jane, which is kind of interesting. There's no real arguments from anyone when she kind of does.
Yeah, which is also
well, maybe a little bit of pushback, but not much. So that's kind of interesting.
pretty progressive again for the time. I feel like having.
I think
a lump.
Jane's a bit wild. I think she could kick all their.
Oh,
asses.
I think so too. I wouldn't mess with Jane.
No. And then we see a guy and his wife. They've broken down. They're sort of middle-aged couple, and the husband says, "Oh, I better flat tire. I better go back to the garage." And the wife says, "Why don't you go through the 7 witches? It'll save you 10 minutes." Or are you scared? She deliberately does it like that.
It made me laugh.
And then he goes wandering off, and suddenly he's walking around through the 7 witches, and he hears a noise, and suddenly a bike comes bursting out of this mound.
That was cool.
And he's like, and instead of hiding behind the rock where he was, he suddenly runs out into the open and gets run over. And then the police start getting reports, don't they?
Oh yes.
And the gang saying someone's must have stolen his body because someone with his clothes is riding around and all this, so they think someone's trying to set them up or something, and it's quite confused at this point because there's all sorts of stuff happening. They get taken in by the police and all this. Anyway, in the end, he comes back. They think it's someone dressed up as him, but he just lifts his helmet and it's him. And he says, all you got to do is really believe you're coming back. You kill yourself and you really believe you're going to come back. And Jane's like, wow, what are we waiting for? She does not care, does she? And her and one of them called Hinky go off and basically crash into the side of a lorry. They just drive into the side of a lorry.
Yeah, pretty cool. The way they kind of go through. I thought that was well done. I was like, oh.
Yeah,
it's very
and
effective.
Hinky doesn't come back because apparently he had doubt at the last minute, but Jane does. So Jane also it's set up that he goes in a pub. Tom goes in a pub early, doesn't he? And he sort of intimidates the barman. Basically, he says this is on the house, and he says no, it isn't, Sonny. 16 pence or something like that.
Yeah.
But this girl who's kind of taking the shine to him pays for him and all that. And but he also shows he's super strong, doesn't he? There's a bit of that. He's super strong now, so kind of invulnerable. Anyway, the girl's taking the shine to him. She comes out, gets on his bike, and she's going, "Nah." He goes, "Nah, get off. I'm busy." And she's saying, "No, I've paid. I deserve, And he kills her.
Yeah, just chokes her to death.
He just strangles.
I was like, "Dang, well."
And rides off, and that's how the police then get involved and all.
He's
this.
not subtle.
Anyway,
I'll say that for him.
Yeah, and the police are trying to figure out what's going on, and then we get a kind of comedy montage of all the bikers trying to kill themselves. It's kind of more funny than anything.
It's kind of more.
We see one of them with a load of chains in his pants.
That would
just throw himself into a river. Yeah, that was ridiculous.
I was like,
there was one. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Oh, it caught me off guard. I was like, what in the world? Why would you? I can think of faster ways, I'll put it that way.
Yeah. And we also get one who lives in a high-rise block, and there's a policeman looking at a bike, and he goes, "Hi, officer," from about 15 stories up. And the policeman says, "Is this your bike?" He says, "Yes, officer." He says, "Well, come down here." He goes, "Okay," and he jumps out the window.
Yeah, that was laugh too.
Traumatize a policeman.
Exactly. They definitely do not like the coppers in this film.
No, they don't. It's so there's kind of amusing ways they top themselves by crashing into things or driving off things and all this and the other. And all of them except Hinky kind of come back. Now Abby's not certain, is she? But then she decides she's going to, and she takes pills. But they rescue her in time.
Yeah.
And she wakes up and the policeman's there and sort of saying, "Oh yeah, the policeman and the copper's there." And she said, "Oh, I'm glad I didn't die. I didn't want to," and all this. And the policeman says, "I've put out a report you're dead because I think whoever's doing this will come for you." It's so weird.
Yeah, it doesn't go the way I thought it would, because it's almost like he's asking her to go somewhere and wait for Tom. But then it's like the next scene, it's like she's undercover in the gang, sort of. But then I get the impression that she's not. Like it's
no.
weird.
There's also a bit, and I'm a bit confused about the timeline, which is kind of a cool shot because it pans around the morgue, and you see all these bikers. You see do you see the bikers in the morgue?
Yeah,
Then,
you do.
Oh, there is one point where there is a morgue and one taps on the glass.
That was
let me
great.
out. And then they kill everyone, in the guys that work in the morgue, don't they? And they all get out.
Yeah.
But there is a bit where the policemen are there and the police inspector's there, and they're just waiting with Abby, I think. And then it slowly pans around the room, and as we come back, we see the policeman laid out.
Yeah.
Don't we? And the police inspector laid out. So the whole pan is they've obviously been killed by the gang. It's really
Now
odd.
that's in the
And then the
jail.
gang go full mad, don't they? Because they're all and Abby tries to pretend she's dead. And Tom said, "Let's go back to my house. You take one side of the wall, and I'll take the other." So he's just going to drive through the wall.
Oh yeah.
So because the bikes are also immortal, or I don't know.
They
Anyway,
seem to be. They seem to kind of have a life of their own now.
Yeah, he drives through the wall, but she doesn't. She says, "Oh, the black back wheel slip," but he's not convinced. He basically sees through it. He says, "You're not dead, are you? You're not dead." Because I don't want to die and all this. But meanwhile, they get this toad out. His mother and Shadwell get this toad out, and they do this ceremony, don't they? Which basically, they're at the Seven Sisters, and they're trying to get Abby to kill herself or join them, and then they all turn to stone.
Yeah.
And doesn't his mum then turn into a frog as well?
Indeed, and I was like, huh. So is his mom like an immortal frog? They don't tell us. She just suddenly a frog
just
is
a
there,
frog.
or the dress. Her dress is left in the chair, and just the frog sitting there. And Shadwell's like, oh, hello, mom. He doesn't actually say that, mind you.
Yeah.
I'm just being goofy, but
yeah, the guys, basically, I think we've made it sound less fun than it is. It's a mad film.
It is.
It is a bonkers, a really entertaining film.
I mean, the part in the jail is really cool, where they just go in the jail and they, just circling back to that, they just kill all the cops in there. And I mean, but they literally ride the guy rides his motorcycle into the police station in the jail.
Oh yeah, that was hilarious. They just pull up at the desk, but the policeman's totally unfazed.
Oh yeah,
he?
he's like,
It's
come with me.
Okay.
Oh man,
him and Jane. Yeah.
But I agree with you, Mark. It's a great film. Like it's a lot of fun, as you say. Just fun, I think, is the key word for the film. Really, it's not a scary film or anything like that. It's a lot of fun. It has some cool supernatural kind of cult elements going on with it, which I always appreciate the cult stuff in horror films. So yeah, it's just fun.
Yeah. It's 90 minutes. It definitely doesn't outstay its welcome. It's got no fat on it at all. It's very lean.
Oh yes.
To the point that some of the script's functional, but it's still hilarious. Some of the dialogue is hilarious. Because they just accept stuff, and things like the frog god or whatever appearing. That's just like, okay.
Yeah. No need for explanation. It's just that's how
we don't
it
need
is,
to explain it. Yeah.
Which it's fine, sometimes less is more, I think.
Yeah. There were a few actors I did recognise, apart from the gang, from other stuff, but they're very much British TV kind of actors, so they wouldn't be known anywhere outside of the UK, really. And people of a certain age, younger people would not know these. Of my age, they would, because, you've seen a lot of TV.
Usually
but it's
the
kind
best
of cool.
actors.
I'm just interested what else this Benmar Productions did, because if they did Horror Express and this, it's kind of amazing. Apparently they did a lot of spaghetti westerns. I say spaghetti westerns that made in Spain, so they're more like paella westerns.
Yeah,
really.
fascinating.
So yes,
I wouldn't mind seeing more from the studio. I mean, they seem like this is well made, for a budget. It's a budget.
It's not
film.
bad. It's put together okay. The dialogue's goofy, but it's not insensible. It's coherent with its own mad logic, isn't it? That's the thing.
It is, yeah.
So that kind of keeps it on the rails. It's not just
And I think also the fact that it's in the 70s makes it work too, because obviously I wasn't around in the 70s, Mark. You'll have to speak to this, but it seems like it was just a very interesting time, like kind of a crazy time. You know,
Yeah, it was more liberal than things are now. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And I think 70s horror films have got their own sort of style. They're not as fast-paced or as frenetic as 80s. And the 80s certainly had more... There was way more horror films in the 80s than the 70s.
Yeah.
But the 70s ones are not left behind. You know, they're still interesting. Because it was that cusp of when they became much more explicit.
Oh, yeah.
And what's the word? More extreme. You know, you got your Texas Chainsaw Massacres and stuff like that in the 70s. The 80s ran with it, but it was kind of more tongue-in-cheek and, you know, less intense.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
you know,
I think the 70s takes itself more seriously, even sometimes when it, you know, maybe shouldn't be taken as serious. But that kind of works for me. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I love cheesy films, and I wouldn't call this a cheesy film because I think that's discrediting it. I think it's well made, but I would say it's of its time, you know, and I think that works in its favor actually.
Yeah, and if you look at it, there's some interesting stuff like the fact the mother isn't just an evil Satanist,
right?
She's something else. The fact that Jane could take over the gang without much of a problem.
Yeah.
Things like that, right?
Yeah, it's actually pretty progressive. And
in some ways,
in some ways, yeah, for sure. It is interesting looking back at, you know, at that time period, and that's one thing I love about all film too. Is, you know, film made in the 70s, 60s. They all have such a different feeling, you know, and it takes you back to a kind of a different era in time. I feel like a lot of films now they you know, at least within the last 20 years, they all sort of feel the same within the 2000s era, you know, but maybe that's just because I'm, you know, here and a part of it. I don't know. What do you think, Mark?
No, I think at the minute horror films are mostly quite serious. But I think the quality of them's pretty good, and I think they do vary quite a bit. You know, I watched 50 for 2022, so I got a feel. But yeah, there were definite themes that are societal, Me Too stuff. You know, phobic points around that, and also phobic points around how the world is going. I expect a lot more horror films about environment, actually. I'm kind of expecting another kind of boom of, you know, nature getting revenge.
Oh, yeah.
At some point
I
soon.
can see that.
I kind of feel that's on the cards at some point. But yeah, no, I don't quite agree. I agree.
You.
I think the 2020s is their own thing. A lot of people say, "Oh, horror films are in a bad way." No, they're not.
I wouldn't say that either. But I guess what I mean more is like the, you know, the feel of the film, like the way they were made. Like everything now kind of uses digital. You know, they're slick. The look of it, they're all slick. Very slick, and you know that's a good thing. But I kind of like, I guess, the different looks that film used to have, you know, from the, like a 30s film looks very different from a film made in the 70s, you know.
Well, a 30s film looks very different from a 40s film.
So true. True.
Even, you know, and so on.
Absolutely.
This definitely feels like, just looking at the film stock, this looks like early 70s film.
Yeah.
To me, you know, just looking at that film stock, you can tell it's moved on from the 60s kind of film stock, which was either very grainy or super lush. That's how 60s were.
Yeah.
Whereas the 70s has a slightly more washed out thing, where it's certainly some film stocks. But yeah, this was a fun film. I really liked it.
Yeah.
Sure. Any last comments before we rate it?
Oh man, I agree. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, let's rate this puppy.
Yeah, I agree with the book I was reading. It's terrific. Okay, what would you give this out of? Should we go out of 5?
Yeah, let's go to 5. I really, really like this one. You know, the production values are maybe not the highest, but it's got that indie kind of early 70s feel to it, because it is early 70s, you know. And I just feel like everything works here. It's a lot of fun. So I'm gonna give it a solid 3 out of 5. How about you?
I'm going to go way higher. I'm going 4 out of 5.
Nice.
And I think it's probably, if I watched it again, it will be creeping upwards rather than downwards.
I agree with that. It's
a solidly entertaining film. It's not scary in any way. No. Not at all. But then Mo's the Hammer isn't scary at all.
So
but we
true.
still love it. But this is, and I'm already eyeing the Blu-ray. Now Kevin mentioned there's a Blu-ray. I think it's a BFI one, British Film Institute one.
Oh, nice.
So I'm going to read up what the extras are too, because I'm kind of interested. But just having the film in a good quality, it's kind of will be awesome.
I agree.
And you know what? If I order it, I'll watch it again this week. I'll definitely watch this again.
Yeah.
So yeah, So this is a 4 out of 5 for me.
Nice.
So yes, very solid movie.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed this one. I
did as well. I feel like you can certainly rewatch it infinitely, which you can't really say about all horror films.
And I have to say, I feel like you could show this to a 12-year-old.
I agree with you. Yeah, it's pretty tame.
It's very tame, but it's still thoroughly entertaining and weird. And interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it would keep their attention. Even,
yeah. I agree.
Okay.
All right. Well, shall we wrap it up here?
Yes.
All right. Well, Mark, thank you as always, man. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and thanks to our listeners for listening. We really appreciate you. Check us out on Facebook. Just look up United Nations of Horror. You'll find us right there. We're also on YouTube. We have the video cast version that comes out a little bit later than the audio version, usually about a week's difference. Gives me a little extra editing time there. So bye from me.
And bye from me.
And we'll see you next time, right here on the United Nations of Horror.
The United Nations of Horror is a podcast about all things horror. From thrillers of yesteryear to today's modern horror, we are here to present fun and intelligent conversation about the genre films we love. Join us and please help spread the word about the United Nations of Horror podcast and videocast to horror fans across the globe. Find the podcast on all fine podcasting services. Join us on Facebook by simply going to facebook.com and entering in United Nations of Horror. You can also find us on YouTube by going to youtube.com and searching for United Nations of Horror podcast.